Now, for these and other political stories, we are now joined by political analyst, Professor Dirk Kotze. Professor Kotze, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Prof, perhaps as we look at the current political landscape in the country at the moment, let's start with the very latest, and that's today's decision by the Court dismissing former President Jacob Zuma's rescission application. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think to a large extent it should have been expected. For a constitutional court to set aside its own judgment would have been exceptionally unusual. So there must have been really very exceptional circumstances and evidence in order to convince them to do that. So I think in that sense, it should not be regarded as a breakthrough or as a major announcement, really. I think most people, to a large extent, expected this type of judgment.
What does this mean for the former president now? I mean, there's quite a number of things that are still outstanding. We now know that, the state capture inquiry has asked for an extension, for that process to happen. As we know that former President Jacob Zuma refused to appear at that, state capture commission. And obviously there's another legal process with the DA, wanting to, make sure that medical parole is also, kind of reversed. There's so many, moving pieces as it relates to the former president. What can we make about his current state now?
Well, I think the focus now moved over to the medical parole matter. And that will determine how long he still has to be incarcerated to a large extent. The extension of the Zondo Commission, I'm not sure that it is going to deal with an extension of evidence. They need a lot of time in order to work through all the documentation that they have in order to compile the final report. So I suspect that most of this time they actually need to deliver the final report, and not so much to open up sessions for new evidence. And certainly I don't think there's an expectation that President Zuma is going to appear before the Zondo Commission. I think that there's almost no chance for that.
I agree with you. It is probably very highly unlikely. Prof, let's just move into that extension request by Justice Zondo. What does this really mean? I know you're talking about them probably needing more time, to compile its report. But I mean, this is probably the third extension. We're talking multi-millions of rands that have gone into this process already. Does it take away from the efforts that have been done and put in and the work behind this commission? What can we make about particularly just the competency of the way in which the commission has been handled over these past couple of years?
Well, it started in 2018, so it's more than 3 years that it is ongoing now. I think what we have seen, the two aspects about the commission are important. The first one is the process that they followed, the fact that we saw it almost daily broadcast on TV. And in the media in general, very well reported on that. The secondly is going to be what will be the report itself, what will be the conclusions by the commission, and what will be their recommendations also. I think what we've seen already in terms of the process and how it unfolded has been exceptionally important for South Africans in general. It has made an absolutely important point with respect to state capture, first of all, but more specifically about corruption, fraud, and other forms of maladministration, especially in the relationship between the state or the public sector and the private sector also. So that in itself, if that stands on its own, is already almost for me more than enough in terms of justifying the Zondo Commission. Because I always say, the test is, let's say the Zondo Commission wasn't there. Where would we been today in terms of understanding the state capture, understanding the last 10 or decade almost, and the effort in order to deal with corruption and fraud and other forms of maladministration, especially in the public sector. So that is absolutely essential that it came at this point in time in the South African political history or history in general. But I think what is expected by many people is that there must be very serious conclusions and very serious recommendations and follow-ups, therefore, by the investigative agencies like the National Prosecuting Authority, Special Investigative Units, and others. So in that sense, yes, I think it is important that they do their work and that the extension is not going to change the status or the importance of the commission.
I hear you on the importance of the commission, and I also appreciate where you are coming from in terms of, having had this view of just the level of corruption and the level of just these nefarious acts that have been happening around our state, over this time being exposed and just understanding the gravity of it all. You also mentioned, that follow-ups are important, and by follow-ups, we're talking about accountability and basically seeing people behind bars. Do you think that it is at all possible that we will see that as soon as that report is released? And of course, a lot of people saying perhaps this extension, just the timing of it also comes during a very questionable time as we are going into the elections, that maybe they want to have this report only released after the elections.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it is linked to the elections ultimately. I think the ANC has prepared themselves already for a very sort of negative type of report that is going to make conclusions about many aspects of the ANC. At the last NEC, or I think it was the Lekgotla, President Ramaphosa referred to specific elements of it about for example, the deployment policy of the ANC that will most possibly be very much criticized. The fact that there were some people within the government that knew about many of these aspects. I think he himself sees that he might be criticized in the report. So there's many components that they expect will focus on them. I think in the end, what is important is that what we are seeing already is that charges are laid to people. Ace Magashule is a good example of that. Zandile Gumede of eThekwini municipality or metro is another example of that, and several others. So the point is that the National Prosecuting Authority and other state institutions don't have to wait actually for this report. The way in which the relationship between the prosecuting authorities and the commission was structured is that there was a special unit of the NPA established to liaise with the commission and to continue with their investigative work already. There is a special, the SIU is there also with their own tribunal that they can deal with matters already. And then in the case of information that has become available, irrespective of whether it was presented to the Zondo Commission, can be used by the NPA and the state prosecuting authorities already. So it doesn't all depend on the outcome of the Zondo Commission's report and its recommendations, whether persons will be or should be prosecuted or not. And therefore, I think everything, all the focus should not necessarily be just on the outcome of the report, but rather see as an unfolding process. And we are seeing almost on a daily basis persons being prosecuted for fraud and for corruption and other types of maladministration already.
Prof, I'd like us to move our discussion now to the elections. As we know, tomorrow the voting registration is open, for people that have not registered to register. I particularly want us to focus a little bit on, just some of the concerns that are coming out about just how safe these elections are going to be. I mean, we saw that shooting of 3 people in KwaZulu-Natal, 5 others being injured in Inanda. Talk to me about what we can expect during this voting registration period and ultimately the November 1 election, date. Are we likely to see political violence, not only in KZN, but in the country?
Well, I think the registration period is going to be relatively peaceful. It's not a part of the election process that's contested. It's not about the competition between different parties or between different candidates. So I don't expect really some incidents over the weekend. I think what we are seeing and what we've seen already is during the process of nominations, and that is not only unique to this year's election, it has been in the past, the same happened. And that is that when there's still the contestation possible, where there's still the possibility for different persons to be nominated for the positions or as candidates to become councillors, that is at the time when the political heat is at its highest and the competition is at its most intense. I think once the nomination process has been concluded, then the reasons or the motivation for conflict will be much less. We've seen in the past, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, because that is where most of the political killings have happened. And it's mainly within the ANC. It's not between political parties, not between the ANC and the IFP or the NFP and some of the other parties, or the EFF is not at all involved in this. But it is within these parties that it is persons who want to see if they cannot create new space for other persons to fill those positions. It's not only councillors and elected representatives, but also senior officials in municipalities, like, for example, city managers and others, because that is hotly contested positions. It is positions that's sought after, where people want to create space for their own favorites in order to come into that position. So that I see as some of the main motivating factors for the political conflict that we are seeing. Once the election is over, to a large extent, a lot of these motivations obviously will disappear. Not completely, but it will be at a much lower level. So I would suspect that the rest of the country, other provinces are not so much affected by it. And unfortunately, KwaZulu-Natal is a bit of a hotspot when it comes to these things.
Political analyst, Professor Dirk Kotze, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
All right, we move on to this now. Government